All right, we're back. Tasty Crypto Show. I'm Ryan Grace, and my guest today, Professor Satoshi at Satoshi Heist on X. Give him a follow. Professor, how you doing?
I'm doing fantastic. Thanks for having me on the show.
Absolutely. Excited to have you here on the show. We've got a lot going on in the market. We're going to jump right into it. But before we do that, for anybody that doesn't follow you on X, maybe isn't familiar with you, can you give us a little bit of background, who you are, and maybe take us a little bit on your crypto journey? How'd you get started? It's always interesting to me to hear when people started and maybe what brought them into the space.
Yeah, sure. So I started working at a bank out of New York City in TradFi for about almost 5 years, a little under 5 years. And I was just, getting into crypto and Bitcoin in around 2016 timeframe. And I rode that insane bubble up to $19,000 is what we traded. I had thought that, just freshly graduated out of business school from NYU. I went to Stern, studied finance there, and I thought I was the next Warren Buffett. And I rode everything back down to the ground, unfortunately. But I stuck around and I started trading options on crypto. And that's actually around the time when I left my safe Wall Street job to go full time into crypto trading options. And I'm happy to double click into the story, to the market, or wherever we want to take this.
Yeah, absolutely. What got you into the crypto options market at the time? Because if I recall, I don't know if, at least in the US, if you had anything like LedgerX at that point, and I'm not really super familiar with the Deribit history, but what was available to you at that point, given it was still relatively early stage? I mean, if we go back to 2017, kind of pre-ICO bubble and bust, as you described, there just wasn't that much out there.
Yeah.
How'd you get started into options
You're
trading?
absolutely right. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Actually, I started watching Tasty live with Tony and Tom
Oh,
a
awesome.
long time ago.
Okay.
Yeah, trading equity options. So I always had a finance background, but back then we had Deribit, which really came on the scene around 2018 when I kind of discovered it, and really more so around 2019 is when things started to really pick up there. Now, Deribit, you're right. Back then, well, now if you are a U.S. citizen, you can't really trade crypto native options. But back then, there was no KYC, and it was this kind of like website you just log in and you deposit all your Bitcoin, and that's kind of just how it went. Even Coinbase back then didn't have KYC when I first got onto Coinbase. But of course, now with the regulations in place and the regulator making sure everybody's identified. Now there are KYC rules, and yes, you're right. LedgerX was an option, and I think FTX had acquired them. Actually, I'm not sure what happened to LedgerX after the FTX implosion.
I believe it was sold off. Yeah, I don't know what it's called now, but there's still an exchange around. I'm not sure if it's available for U.S. users, though.
Yeah. But now at least there's IBIT options, I think, available. And the volume on IBIT options is actually growing quite significantly. And it's growing so fast that they actually increased the contract size limits. So I think, for all the Tasty watchers and listeners, I think you can run your wheel on IBIT and generate more Bitcoin slowly over time. So I think that's an option.
Yeah, I love that strategy. I want to dig into that a little bit more. I mean, in terms of trading options, a lot of people will probably look at Bitcoin and think, okay, you want to buy longer dated stuff and just ride that upside. It's been a pretty decent performer, to say the least. But how do you approach the market? Are you a premium seller? Are you a buyer? Are you kind of trading all over the place? What's your strategy?
Yeah, so there's a few ways to view the Bitcoin market. It's matured a lot over time. I do like to call myself like a Theta collector. That was actually going to potentially be my crypto Twitter name, but I thought that was just way too traditional finance for the crypto world. But I mainly like to sell options because of all the statistics that how 80% of options expire worthless. all those stats really spoke to me. And I felt that options in that way was a game that, I could really, win over the long run. As long as, you're not, you're not like maxing out your account and your margin, and you're doing it responsibly. I have some funny stories where I actually blew up a significant portion of my accounts, but I think the larger portion of my strategy is definitely selling options. And then there are definitely key moments in Bitcoin in particular where you definitely do not want to be selling options and you want to definitely be owning or buying, especially since it's such a catalyst based asset. It moves based off catalysts. So you maybe not might you might you might want to be a little careful around some particular catalysts. Like we just had the strategic Bitcoin reserve. Actually, you might have been able to fade that move by selling calls, but definitely leading into it, I would not want to have been shorting any calls, for example. But if we have these like crazy illiquid down moves, where Bitcoin falls 20-30% in like one day, and you could fade those moves with short puts or short put spreads and things like that. So you got to pick your spots, but I think in general I do tend to lean on the selling option side, where it's whether it's like calls or puts, ratio spreads, or even sometimes in some cases straddles. So it's a mixture of both. And I would say for the majority of time, definitely seller of options. Just don't want to be a seller of options when you got those catalysts in front of you.
Absolutely. Do you read into kind of the lower volatility levels that we're seeing as maybe a time you don't want to sell options? I mean, I think there's a couple schools of thought, right? On one hand, I get that you've got a high IV rank, you've got high implied volatility. I want to sell that, assuming that there's premium relative to realized. Maybe not so much if realized is moving at the same level or more. But I think there's also a view that I want to ride that declining volatility. Sure, you might want to sell a spike in the VIX in equities, for example, but it's quite often a lot easier to sell that break of, say, 20 as it moves back to 12 versus trying to pick a spot on its way up as it's expanding. So with that in mind, I mean, when you look at the current environment, and I think this is somewhat puzzling to people, and I want to dig into it a little bit more, but you have seen these moves that you've talked about, right? You've got ETH down 50% in the past couple of months. Bitcoin's taken a hit. Anything outside of that with a smaller market cap is down much worse. But when you look at DVOL or you look at the Ethereum equivalent, and I think if I'm correct, that's coming from Deribit, but let me know if I'm wrong there. But you look at some of these implied volatility measurements, and they haven't necessarily spiked. I mean, when I look at Bitcoin volatility, I've got 47 on my screen right now, towards the low end of the range. Is this a point where you should be hesitant to sell volatility? Do you look at this as an opportunity? Like, how do you think about the current levels of implied volatility and trading options here?
Yeah, it's really great that you bring that up. And I think a lot of options traders on the crypto native side are observing this. I think there's a few things at play here, but before we get into it, the funny thing is back then in like 2018 onwards, let's just say, it used to be this widely accepted trade that whenever you see vols, trading 30 handle or buyer, just hand over fist buy because there's going to be some move. And then if you see vols rip to like 100, sell. Like that's just a fade. Obviously, that's just a general rule of thumb. Now, I realized that Bitcoin spot could be moving intraday like 10K candles. Meanwhile, you have this phenomena where the implied vol is like it's literally just down only, right? So I think that's a very interesting phenomena that we're experiencing. Almost not that it's just only started to happen, but it's this new environment that I think vol sellers or options traders in general are starting to monitor. Part of me thinks MicroStrategy has something to do with it because MicroStrategy trades at literally I think double. It's almost I think the last I checked is like 90 handle. And just a lot more attention go if it's like people who if you're going to long Bitcoin, why not long MicroStrategy? And so that in some form or shape is actually vol dampening for Bitcoin. Um, and to your question about, what should we be doing when vols are kind of like suppressed or depressed like this, there is a double-edged sword, because when you're looking at vols like this, so depressed, you're kind of hesitant to want to sell, because for fear of like a spike. And of course, you get caught on the wrong side of that, then it's gonna be quite expensive to hedge deltas, and especially if you don't know why we're spiking, then you gotta unhedge, and then it costs more money to wind back down those deltas. So like, I'm actually more of the opinion that if this is the direction, I don't mind selling, but of course you do have to size down, and I wouldn't be selling anything naked. For example, when we were lingering down in like the 77, 80, I was very keen on selling puts, but I wasn't going to be selling just naked puts. I would actually, for example, sell 75 and long 73 or some 70, some combination like that. Just because if you do get that spike, you want to make sure you're covered. Now that being said, I do like fading, just like you mentioned for the VIX, and I think that was a really good trade, because I think VIX is, what, last I checked, like 18 today. It got hammered down, right? That's sort of what I like to do for Bitcoin too, especially when you have those events. I think the inauguration of the U.S. president was a great event to fade, and a lot of macro events, if you're really into selling near dated options for Bitcoin, tend to like revert down. It's almost like a free trade all the time, unless the macro data, like whether it's a CPI, FOMC, unless it's like egregiously out of line. Usually those are free trades for selling like near dated vol.
Yeah, when I look at Bitcoin volatility or implied vols here again, you've really been rewarded for selling any spike in there over, well, the last year or so, but we've seen that the trend for implied volatility over time has been a series of lower highs. One observation that we've made or we'll talk about here on the show at times is that there's a positive correlation between implied volatility, or more so even just realized volatility, and price. Obviously, that speaks to the asymmetry that exists here. It can only go to zero. A lot of times these tokens will trade with 200% plus vols. I think that's true, but do you see the same thing? I mean, is it true? Is there any empirical evidence? Is there anything that you've observed that shows that, yes, we do see a positive correlation between implied vol and price in the crypto markets versus that inverse correlation we typically observe in more traditional markets?
Yeah, there is. There is a positive spot vol correlation for Bitcoin. It's actually not something a lot of crypto options traders look at, but I do know a lot of my equity options trader friends, they do look at that. I don't know if it's not part of my daily routine, but for sure if you're trading like the weeklies, which has been really popular in this tape because it's like a trader's tape, right? Every day there's news. Every day there's turns every almost every other day in this market. So if you're trading the weeklies, you do benefit from that positive spot vol correlation, and if you do want to pick a turn of the market, sticking to the weeklies is probably your best bet.
When you take a look at your process or kind of maybe what you go through as a trader, is there anything that you're seeing right now that gives you a sense of maybe where we're going? There's a lot of discussion as to whether we're at the very beginning of the cycle or that the cycle has already come and passed. I'm more that we're at the beginning of the cycle still. But is there anything that you're seeing in the market that kind of gives you a hint as to where you think we might be headed next?
Ooh, I used to be a subscriber to this cycle theory for Bitcoin. I think with the introduction of the ETF, I'm no longer really a strong believer of that. If anything, I'm a believer of the business cycle. And there's I feel like there's a big disconnect or dislocation right now between retail sentiment and institutional sentiment. Like, uh, being in New York, I just see all the investment and all the interest finally, coming into crypto just, 2 months ago. And I know, prices are down 30%. That's quite normal. Um, so there is this huge disconnect. And I think maybe it is an opportunity, but I do also understand that we're in a highly uncertain environment right now, especially with the tariffs and the growth scare, the macro like growth scare guys are, I think they're evolving into recession. I think that that's a little bit premature in my view. So the market's kind of like all over the place, but as someone who's been in Bitcoin, I guess it's easy for me to say since like I bought my first Bitcoin around like $700, but I've been buying on dips and I feel comfortable holding this asset over a long period of time because I know the goal is, to trade at least, half the market cap of gold or at least eat into that market cap more, especially if you have the likes of Larry Fink going on Bloomberg and saying it is digital gold, right? So the job's not done. We're trading at 88K right now on my screen. So, we still got, $400,000 more to go, right, guys? So and if you are, afraid of these if you are afraid of like a Bitcoin, down move to like 30% down move, let's say it's 50% down move, that's the whole point that I trade options because like if you can generate 0.5% of your account equity per week selling premium, over the course of the year, you can minimize any drawdown by collecting those premiums. So I have a long-term view on Bitcoin, and I know that on crypto Twitter or some social media platforms they'll be like, oh my God, it's over, like this cycle that we just topped, and like there's nothing else to look forward to. Actually, I feel like in so many ways we're just barely opening up the gates on the regulatory side to onboard even more people into crypto. So it's a very good question because I feel like there's such a big dislocation in terms of the sentiment and where we are. I do understand like risk markets, they ebb and flow with the narrative, and right now the narrative is this growth scare, the tariffs. I feel like we're close to a crescendo of that narrative, and you saw it today. We had a huge bid on risk just in general. I'm just looking at equities ripping, crypto all ripping. Maybe we get a little bit of backing and filling, sure. But come April 2nd, when we get that tariff, the full scope of the tariffs, that uncertainty from the market is going to be, it's not going to exist anymore. So I think there will be some relief in Q2 at some point. Maybe we're starting to see, at least we can see there's an appetite to bid here, right? People are saying, we're going straight to 50K on Bitcoin. And I was like, I don't know if markets go straight down like that. But yeah, there's just this huge disconnect that I see. And I don't know if you see it too, but I remain bullish. I'm a perma bull on Bitcoin, long term, of course. Near term, maybe a little bit of uncertainty that we're working through right now.
Yeah, I tend to be as well. I think it's somewhat a function of being in this early. I think for a lot of people that have been able to experience the swings and you have a stomach for the volatility as a result. And as you mentioned, you get used to the fact that this is an asset that is going to trade lower or pull back by 20, 30%. That's totally normal. If you have something that can go up 2x, 5x, 10x, if you're looking at, with some smaller tokens, you are going to get larger pullbacks, obviously. So I'm with you there and tend to be a bit perma bullish over long-term time horizons as well. That said, I mean, when you look at the recent price action, and I agree with you, there's a really short-term memory in the market, in crypto markets specifically, and people tend to be very impatient. At least that's the sense I get on X. Everyone wants to get rich overnight, and sometimes that does happen, obviously, in some of these things. But, when you look at the recent market price action here, do you feel like, coming out of this turn here, do you think that the low, we'll call it about 75, I mean, do you think that that's in for now? Not that we couldn't retest it, but, how do you think about the market going forward?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I've been watching basically I have SPX on one side, and then the Qs, and then I have Bitcoin. They're highly correlated. I think I ran like this correlation on. I cleaned up. It's not. Everyone has different R values, but this R value is like 0.8, which is basically, for lack of better words, is very correlated. And I think Bitcoin is a risk leader. It led the way down first, and then SPX, came down after, and it bottomed first. So the most interesting thing, in my opinion, before answering your question with my view, is that Bitcoin never went to the November 4th, 2024 lows, which is the U.S. election level that everyone's watching, whereas SPX did.
Yeah.
Right. The Qs like blew through that. Tesla went down as much as Solana for like, that's crazy, right? And then of course, Ethereum went to like, I think it was like 2023 levels, and then Solana went to August 5th, 2024 Japanese yen unwind level, like, and Bitcoin is like, is just hanging out. I was like, wow, how is this thing not, getting down to this November 4th level? And then what I like to watch is to inform, whether or not the bottom is in, is to look at the order book, spot order books for Bitcoin. And that order book was just lit up around that 75K level, 77K level. And that was, I actually, I took a short-term trade around there. And I do think, this bounce underway right now will have some backing and filling. I'm not sure if we're going to break to new lows just right away. I can't say that for sure, because there's just a lot of bids in that region. But if we do get, some backing and filling down to like 84, 86, that could be a nice, higher low to play, because I do have a, generally I think more positive outlook for Q2 than most of my crypto trader peers, just because I think the growth scare is now becoming a recession, and I don't think the U.S. is entering into a recession. I think that's a little bit premature to call, because we don't see the data for that yet, and the way the market's overshot to the downside, I feel like people are just pricing in like an imminent recession. So unless those bids leave for Bitcoin, I think this you should trust that 77K and look to bid any dips going into Q2. That's going to be my plan. I think obviously April 2nd, it's really path dependent on April 2nd for the tariffs. But yeah, like I would definitely be buying dips on Bitcoin, and I don't know about the 66K calls and the 50K calls. I would definitely bet against that. But if someone said, "Hey, do you think Bitcoin could hit 75 or something?" Yeah, maybe it might just sweep underneath that low. But I'll be looking to buy dips going into Q2 as we close out Q1. That's for sure.
I've got to ask you about some of these dates and some tweets. I think, of course, everyone needs to go and follow you at Satoshi Heist on X. This show always goes by way too quickly for me. But before we run out of time, couple of tweets I want to ask you about, because I thought these were really interesting. You got a series of dates: March 21st, March 24th, March 30th, April 2nd, April 17th. I think you've alluded to April 12th a little bit, or 2nd here, excuse me, a little bit. But what is significant about some of these dates that you've tweeted?
Yeah, I think options traders will definitely maybe catch on to some of these dates. So March 21st is OpEx, and then the 24th is the Monday afterwards, which I felt that we would see how the market wants to naturally move after all that gamma rolls off from that OpEx. And then March 30th is actually my birthday.
Awesome.
So I put that in there as kind of like a trick, a little bit of a trick. And then April 2nd is a tariffs, and then April 17th we got another OpEx. So I thought only option traders would understand that. So I think a lot of the people on the Tasty Show would definitely kind of read into those dates.
Absolutely. Well, and I think you're seeing some of that here today, right? Post what was a pretty large expiration when you look at the S&P. You get, when you look at the dynamic around dealer hedging and the flows associated there, you get some of that removed. And we saw this, I think, going back to March during, March 2020, I think, during the COVID period. You have that dynamic that maybe if it's only short-lived can really move markets in one way or the other. And here we're seeing, quite the move to the upside and with Bitcoin as well. So we'll keep an eye on those OPEX dates going forward. But one last question for you before we wrap things up. I think I'm in your camp here. We're going to probably take a little flack from the Army, but you tweeted about XRP. XRP fully diluted value right around, I want to say it's 250 billion or so, right there with ETH. Doesn't make much sense to me that these two are at par. Can you dig into that a little bit and explain why maybe the XRP market cap equal with ETH's market cap doesn't make sense to you?
Yeah, so I think I've been thinking about this and I've been looking at this chart because if you look at if you just look at the XRP chart, it looks like nothing has even happened to it. When you see the S&P and the Qs and Bitcoin and every other risk asset is just, the chart is murdered, right? And XRP is just kind of like hanging out in this like giant range. It's any technician can just look at that and say, well, nothing's happening here, just chopping right after a huge move up. And I can't argue with that technician's observation because it literally does just look like it's chopping at the highs and nothing is happening to it. What doesn't make sense to me is that Ethereum has like $80 billion of AUM, or you can call it TVL, and all this DeFi activity. You got the L2s, Coinbase Base Chain, and Arbitrum, Optimism, and it's like, does XRP really deserve to be, trading at this valuation? Now in crypto, there's a meme that the crypto folks like to say, and they say, valuation is just a meme. And to some extent, that's true because you got these meme coins that are trading at higher valuations than some of the biggest crypto companies, for example. So I've been trying to short this thing because I just don't think that the valuation makes sense, and I think that there's some evil cabal behind the scenes like lifting up this price. So I make some memes about it, but I think that a liquid move from the election lows really, boosted the price, and it's just kind of hanging out about here for now. But it either means that Ethereum is trading severely in a severely depressed state and actually should, really, really go up a lot, or XRP, I guess somehow magically became the number 2 like best crypto out of nowhere, and I have a hard time believing that it did become the best crypto out of nowhere. That's my view.
It's fascinating to observe. I agree with you. I mean, when this breaks, it's going to break, and that could be to the upside too. And this trading at about a 200%, a little bit more realized vol, at least over the last month or so. But yeah, one that again could go very quickly, much lower, or could flirt with some levels that won't make any more sense than they do here today. But I also tend to agree with you. I think, in my opinion, really the trade that has yet to unfold, but if we are early in the grand scheme of things, I think ETH is that sleeping giant. It's just been left for dead, but we know how quickly that can change.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if ETH trades like 2,500, 2,800 in Q2. I have this view that everyone wanted to sell, when we were in December of last year, every crypto native was saying, I'm going to sell in March to front run that April and that May time period. And then I'm going to just, sail, go to Ibiza and like party. And guess what? we December 9th, we got, hit just like straight down, like 50% down in like one go. And then January was not that, easy either with the executive orders. And then of course, now we have this tariff thing. So actually I feel like it's like, we're going to have it's the opposite of what we all expected. everyone was like saying good Q1, and then I'm gonna sell and like wait to buy the lows in August because of that seasonality. And now I feel like we're gonna bottom, late March, maybe bleed into April, right? Um, and we're gonna bottom in April and run up to May and possibly even into end of June, which is like the end of Q2. That's as far as like my view kind of goes. But it's just kind of like this contrarian view that Q1 is going to be bullish, and then Q2, slow down into the summer months. It's just I feel like that's really going to play out, and it's going to catch a lot of people off guard too.
Well, I think we've got to have you back on the show at that point in another month or two here. Would love to have you back. We've unfortunately run out of time today, but it's been a pleasure, Professor. If anybody doesn't follow you that's watching, make sure to go to X, follow Professor Satoshi at Satoshi Heist. Great follow. And again, thanks for coming on the show this afternoon. Excited to have you on here and would love to have you back at some point in the future.
Thanks. This was great, and I look forward to being back.
Awesome. Well, that's going to do it for our show. I will be back on Wednesday. Until then, I'm Ryan. Peace.